I've always been drawn to mysteries, and the old cemetery at the edge of town always caught my attention. That night, something felt off. The thick fog surrounded me, and I heard a whisper coming from a tomb, "You shouldn't be here." When I got closer, a shadow appeared before me, freezing me in place. I couldn't move, and the darkness swallowed me. I disappeared, but something, or someone, is still watching me.
The mist crawled through the cemetery like spectral fingers, sliding between the ancient tombstones. The smell of damp earth and decaying leaves made the air heavy, almost oppressive. Ethan and his friends never believed in the local legends, and now they were there, challenging fear in a foolish bet. "This is ridiculous," Ethan said, kicking a rock. "The cemetery silencer? It's just a story to scare kids." Liam and Jordan laughed, but Emma, the only one hesitating, crossed her arms and looked around. "We shouldn't be here," she murmured. "My grandparents always said that whoever makes noise in this place disappears forever." Liam mocked. "How convenient. And no one ever finds the bodies. If no one finds them, how do they know they disappeared?" Jordan added, laughing. Emma didn't find it funny. The wind seemed to change, bringing a strange silence. The sounds of crickets and rustling leaves vanished, as if something greater was waiting. Ethan pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The weak light illuminated a mausoleum at the top of the hill, its cracked marble casting threatening shadows. "Let's go up there," he suggested, already walking. Emma hesitated, but the others followed. When they reached the mausoleum, they noticed strange marks on the stone, deep scratches, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. "What the hell?" Jordan began, but his voice vanished. Silence took over. Not just ordinary silence, but an absolute void. No wind, no breathing, nothing. Emma moved her lips, trying to speak, but there was no sound. Ethan touched Liam's shoulder, desperate. His friend turned with wide eyes, trying to scream, but it was useless. Then the temperature dropped. A shiver ran down Ethan's spine as something moved in the darkness. A tall figure, dressed in a black cloak, emerged from between the tombstones. Its face was hidden by a dense shadow, as if the night itself bowed to it. The friends started running. Panic took over their bodies, but their steps felt heavier, as if something invisible was draining their strength. Emma tripped and fell. Ethan turned to help her, but at that moment, she began to slide backward, pulled by an invisible force toward the mausoleum. Her eyes were filled with pure terror, her mouth open in a scream no one could hear. Then, in the blink of an eye, she was gone. The silence faded. The sounds of the night returned, as if nothing had happened. But Emma was no longer there. Ethan, Liam, and Jordan stood frozen, their hearts pounding. Whatever the silencer was, it now knew they were there. The wind blew again, but Ethan, Liam, and Jordan couldn't move. The absolute silence they had just experienced left them paralyzed. Emma had simply disappeared before their eyes, as if swallowed by the darkness. "We need to get out of here," Ethan finally managed to say, his voice trembling. Liam grabbed his arm tightly. "And Emma? We can't just leave her." Jordan looked at the mausoleum. The door slightly ajar creaked faintly, as if calling them. "Maybe she's in there," he murmured. The thought of entering that tomb filled them with dread, but they couldn't abandon Emma. Summoning courage, Ethan pulled out his phone flashlight and was the first to move forward. The inside of the mausoleum was even more suffocating than the night outside. Moss-covered stone walls, old coffins stacked high, and a strong, damp odor. Every step echoed heavily in the confined space. "Emma?" Ethan called in a whisper. No response. Liam and Jordan entered right behind him. The three moved slowly, alert to any movement. The silence that had taken over the cemetery seemed to exist inside the mausoleum as well. Then a sound cut through the air, a long, deep scratch against the stone. The three turned at once. The mausoleum door slammed shut with a bang. The darkness became almost total. Ethan trembled as he moved the lantern, trying to illuminate the space. That's when they saw it. At the back of the mausoleum, a figure stood among the coffins, tall, wrapped in a black cloak, its face still hidden by a shadow that seemed to move on its own. The air around it vibrated, as if it absorbed any sound. And then it advanced. Ethan tried to scream, but no sound came out. Liam and Jordan stepped back, but something invisible held them in place. The silencer extended a long, skeletal arm. The darkness around it seemed to grow, swallowing the little light that remained. Liam fell to his knees, his face pale. He tried to speak, but his mouth moved without making a single noise. Jordan pressed his head, as if an invisible pressure was crushing his skull. Ethan felt a force pulling him backward. His heart raced, but he couldn't fight. His body seemed to be losing energy, as if it was being drained. Then something happened. Suddenly, a whisper cut through the silence. "Run!" The voice was weak, but recognizable. "Emma." The spell that held them broke for a second. Without thinking, Ethan grabbed Liam and Jordan, pulling them toward the door. They pushed with all their strength, and it gave way. They stumbled out into the cold night. The wind blew again, and the sounds of the cemetery returned. But when they looked back, the mausoleum was empty. Emma was still not with them, and the silencer was not done. They ran through the thick fog that enveloped the cemetery, feeling their feet heavy and their breaths frantic. The fear was palpable, cold, and strange, surrounding them and making them question if they were truly alive. Ethan looked around, searching for any sign of Emma, but she was nowhere to be found. The darkness seemed to stretch endlessly. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the empty cemetery streets, but something was wrong. They were not alone. "Emma!" Liam shouted, his voice frantic, but once again there was no answer. The wind sliced through them like blades, freezing them to the bone. Jordan's face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. He seemed to be paying attention to something the others couldn't perceive, his gaze fixed on a distant point where the mausoleum had once been. "I saw something back there," Jordan said, almost breathless. Ethan and Liam exchanged glances, both skeptical. There was nothing but darkness and fog around, but Jordan's terrified look made them hesitate. "You're saying that?" Liam started, but was interrupted by a low, muffled sound coming from behind them. It was as if something was following them, dragging itself along the ground, trying to approach without being heard. Ethan spun around quickly, pointing the flashlight at the sound. But once again there was nothing there. "I can't take it anymore," Liam screamed in panic. "We can't keep going like this. We need to get out." But fear seemed to take over, stronger than the need to escape. The sensation that they couldn't run anymore, that the cemetery itself was slowly swallowing them, paralyzed them in place. The feeling that they were being watched grew more intense. It was then that the sound of something being dragged made them turn their eyes back to the mausoleum. The door was now completely shut, and a sinister presence took form in front of them. The shadow of the silencer appeared, standing still, watching them. Suddenly, Ethan's flashlight flickered and went out. The darkness deepened even more, and the sound of shallow footsteps echoed around them. They were surrounded. "Emma, where are you?" Ethan whispered desperately. There were no more answers. The figure of the silencer moved. Slowly, it approached Ethan, as if it knew exactly where he was. Its steps were calm and controlled, and though the three of them tried to back away, it seemed as though the ground beneath them was opening. The pressure on their bodies increased, as if the very air was trying to suffocate them. "We can't escape," Jordan screamed, starting to cry. The figure then took a final step toward Ethan. Its eyes glowed with a pale white hue, and the air around it became thick. It was at that moment that a final gust of wind cut through the night, causing the silencer to retreat, even if just for a second. And in that moment of distraction, Ethan ran, pulling Liam and Jordan with him. They rushed out of the cemetery, not looking back. When they finally reached the gate, the pressure lifted. The sound of trees and rustling vegetation surrounded them. But even with their newfound freedom, Ethan knew that something terrible was still following them. The silencer was still out there, somewhere, waiting for the right moment to return. The curse of the cemetery would never be broken, and Emma would never come back.